I've been thinking a lot lately about what happens when you're stuck running from crisis to crisis. When every day is about responding to the latest emergency, the latest headline, the latest trauma, you lose something fundamental. You lose the ability to imagine what could be different. To explore this challenge more deeply, I wanted to talk with someone who's dedicated his career to solving it. Jamye Wooten has a name for this. He calls it reactivism, and he's seen it up close. He was in Ferguson. He was in Baltimore after the murder of Freddie Gray. He watched the social impact sector move, as he puts it, from Black Death to Black Death, from hashtag to hashtag. And at some point, he realized if we keep this pace, we'll always be in reactive mode. And we'll never actually build the future we say we want. So Jamye stepped back from the front lines to create what he calls an imagination incubator. Through his work at CLLCTIVLY in Baltimore, he's now serving over 200 social impact organizations. But he's not just funding projects, he's building infrastructure for imagination itself. That means residencies that pay people $75,000 just to pause and create, participatory grant making that values people over programs, gatherings designed around remembering, reimagining, and restoring. Jamye's proving that imagination isn't some soft luxury we get to when things calm down. It's the foundation. And when a sector stops imagining, it stops building anything worth reaching. I'm Eric Ressler, and this is Designing Tomorrow. And now, my conversation with Jamye Wooten. Jamye Wooten, thank you so much for making time for me today.
Honored to be here with you, Eric.
So we were talking a little bit before we started recording about different ways you might kind of frame this show and some of the things that have been new with you since it's been a while since we've connected. And the way I kind of want to start this is by teeing up a piece we just published just this Monday, at least when we were recording this. And the piece was really a reflection of mine around how to navigate what's going on right now. I've been dealing with a lot in terms of how the sector has been shaped this year by a lot of the federal policies and the general kind of chaos and uncertainty in the space that's had trickle-down effects for us. And I've kind of developed a little bit of this like mantra, this North Star for me around really making sure that when I show up each day, I'm focusing on the things that I actually personally have control and agency over, and making sure that I'm making moves around those things instead of getting sucked up in the chaos, the uncertainty, the headlines, the negativity, which is real. It's real. I don't want to diminish that. And you were talking a little bit earlier about this idea of imagination. And I'd love if you could share your perspectives on how you're thinking about all of that right now.
Yeah, we've been calling collectively recently an imagination incubator of just a space for imagination. It's a quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard that says, "We no longer dream dreams, we seek relief from the pain." And so often what we see is our organization serving over, 200 social impact organizations here in Baltimore, often starting with the pain, which is reasonable, right? That they're finding themselves in certain situations, but that it often sort of robs them of their imagination. It's what I wrote about years ago called Beyond Reactivism. So when I was thinking about starting collectively, it was how do we move beyond reactivism? So this is an emergence of Black Lives Matter and state-sponsored violence, and we're going from hashtag to hashtag, where I say from Black Death to Black Death. And I wanted to step back a little bit from the front lines. I was in Ferguson here in Baltimore after the murder of Freddie Gray, and say, how do we build more holistically? And how do we dream and build the type of institutions that we want to build? That if we keep this same pace up, every crisis will always be in reactivism mode. And so we've been trying to create a container for imagination and to provide space for other folks to pause and imagine the future that they want to see.
I love that perspective, and it's something that I've thought about a little bit in a different way from my background in being a creative professional and understanding and knowing deeply to some degree that my most creative ideas happen almost by definition when I'm not working on them, right? When I'm away doing something else, when, the common saying of like a shower thought, I do a lot of thinking in the shower, even if it's not always good for my water bill and sustainability. Been trying to walk more, right? Like get out behind the screen, like back into lived experience, back into humanity at some level. And I think there's a similar pattern or a similar need in this, the way you frame it around imagination, but it requires space. And there's a moment right now where space is a luxury, right? Where when you are stuck in this reactivism or this reactionary thinking or a true scarcity position, not just a scarcity mindset, how do we break that cycle? There's, in my opinion, a lot of burden here on the fundraising or the funder side on this, right? To who have the resources to provide resources for sabbaticals, for space, for true innovation in philanthropy and R&D in philanthropy and changing the way the outcomes are measured there. But how do you think about the off ramps to that cycle that's not ultimately constructive towards actually making social change?
Yeah, I think you have to be really intentional about it. We this year hosted We Give Black, and it was a 3-day gathering. Sort of the theme was remembering, reimagining, and restoring. So one, remembering that we've been here before and that we have tools, what we call our AI's ancestral intelligence. How do we go back into the ways in which we've always built community? And then how do we reimagine from that what is possible in this moment? This year we launched, well, we've always had this residency program, but we made it public this year where we had over 250 applicants apply. All the fellows receive a $75,000 stipend. And it's for them to spend a year with us, for them to kind of take a break and also work on a creative project they want to work on in the world. And so we currently have 5 residents. They spend, again, a year with us, and just saw a video from one today of just what it means to pause, particularly if you have been an entrepreneur or creative and you're looking for the next gig and the next job and the next thing, to have a year where you can say, okay, I at least know some of my basic bills are covered. I don't necessarily have to sort of hustle for the next gig. And to what you just said, like most all of the creative genius happens when we have a moment just to do nothing. Which is hard to kind of deprogram yourself to that when you've been in sort of a grind, hustle mode. So we've been trying to be very intentional about how do you create space and offer that space to individuals and community to take a pause and a break to be their best selves.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd love to dig more into how you think about designing and evaluating programs like that as a funder, even if you're doing micro grants. My sense is that a lot of the structures of traditional institutional philanthropy, at least, and how we measure and evaluate success is often focused on outcomes, right? And I think there's a good faith reason for that at its core. Like we want to make sure that when we're making investments, that those investments are paying off and that we're actually making progress on the issues that are important to work on. And at the same time, I do also fear that sometimes we get stuck in these kind of short-term outcomes and we're not building towards sustainability, not for philanthropy, but sustainability for the organizations who are actually practitioners doing the boots on the ground work, who need things like overhead and sabbaticals and breaks and space for imaginative thinking and trying things that they're not sure are going to work, because we have to do that in order to come up with new ideas. Sure, there's, proven solutions that just lack funding, that need more funding. We should be throwing money at those things, yes. But also, we know that we need new solutions to the problems that we have not solved, despite trying for decades at times. So as a funder, I'm curious to hear how you think about when you're giving out these grants, some micro grants, some major grants. How are you thinking about assessing the success of those investments from your perspective, and also figuring out who to provide the grants to and who are not as good of a fit for the grant?
Yeah, I always say we start with impact. We start with organizations that we know have done amazing work in the world, and we're often say philanthropy invests in projects and programs, and we try to put people before projects and programs. All of our grant making is participatory, so it is community advisory boards, review committees that come alongside us to do this work. And we're looking at maybe not traditional metrics of did you have an opportunity to rest? How are you collaborating and partnering with others in community? We really care about the well-being. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and lost my dad at 56 and my sister at 53. And so we know, like, while we may celebrate the hustle, the bootstrapping and the grind and resilience of community, it will also take you out. And so we want to make sure that our leaders, who have often been pouring from an empty cup, often using their own personal resources to try to give back to community, that they have what they need. And like everybody deserves this sort of risk capital. Like we've been blessed collectively to have the type of investment that allows us maybe to try non-traditional programs. And they've been a blessing. Like the outcome and what we've seen from community and the response that we receive from community has been a blessing. And we want to make sure that others have that same opportunity to say, like, can I just try this? And that, you can fail forward.
Yeah.
That everything's not a failure. We've had some hiccups with some things that, we would do differently. But the ability to try and the ability to imagine, again, we don't want to snatch the dream away to where now, you learn how to fill out a grant application just to serve the interests of philanthropy. And you're no longer imagining beyond that thing that first drew you to this work in the beginning.
We recently did a spotlight interview with Jen Wynn of the Stupsky Foundation, and she spoke, I think, in a lot of this, I'm hearing a lot of parallels in the way that you're thinking about this and the way that our conversation panned out there. And it's really interesting to me to explore where the current fundraising or the current funder ecosystem and way of doing things has been broken. And I think it's broken in small ways. And I think it's also, if you want to go philosophical, broken in major ways around like how oftentimes these institutions are even born from, extreme wealth and disproportionate wealth. Without going too esoteric, what are some ways that you would like to see the funder ecosystem and funder best practices and funder common practices changing in a way that would better the social sector at large?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think more participatory, trust-based models is where it's at, like allowing folks who are most impacted to be part of this decision-making process. I mean, particularly even in this moment, like what we have done is really doubled down on individual donors, like the ways in which sort of philanthropy even if this wasn't a Trump moment, philanthropy every 3 to 5 years is creating a new priority and not necessarily given the sort of runway that an organization really needs to build, grow, and sustain. And so if it was true in 2020, that Black-led organizations in particular were disinvested and underfunded, the same is true today. And so, yeah, but it was a moment at the murder of George Floyd, and it didn't take very long for funders to begin to say we are now shifting to other priorities. And so I would love to see foundations and funders make a long-term commitment to really bet like they want organizations to win, to give them the ability to scale and take the type of risks that they need. Most of the organizations we work alongside with, they're going from year to year just trying to stay afloat. And so I would love to see the type of investments, the multi-year commitments to organizations that you believe in, to really fund them like you want them to win.
You have a background as an entrepreneur. You were raised in a family of entrepreneurs. And one of the parallels that I've been thinking about a lot is how investments happen in the corporate world, especially in the startup world, especially in the VC-backed world, versus how it happens in philanthropy. And I understand that we're not comparing apples to apples here necessarily. At the same time, though, despite all of the deficiencies of the venture capital world and fundraising system, of which I think there are many, there is this sense of placing a bet and really having a shared goal of that bet really paying off. And the incentives might be because VCs want to have a 10x return on their investment financially. My sense is there isn't a similar feeling in the social impact sector, traditionally speaking. And I think that's where there is a gap in risk capital, and there is a gap in that longer term thinking. When you're an investor in a VC world funding a 2-person tech startup, you're looking at the IPO 10 years out. And there's a pathway and there's a framework for how that works with multiple rounds of funding and gap funding and angel investors, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't see a similar pipeline for the social impact sector. Does it exist and I'm just not aware of it, or is there actually a deficiency there in the funding ecosystem?
Yeah, if it does exist, I'm not aware of it as well. And particularly, again, serving Black-led organizations that are normally starting similar 1 to 2-person operation with no funding available, and now trying to build the type of relationship capital you need to even have a conversation with a funder, and normally that not coming out with the type of investment that would allow you to scale. we would hear a lot of conversations early on about like capacity and capacity building. I was like, well, capital will help you build capacity. And it was like more trainings. Folks need more, capacity building, more learnings, as opposed to like, what does it mean to get the upfront capital that allows me to go hire my COO and my CFO and my legal and begin to build out a team? Most folks are building as they climb without this type of infrastructure. What we've tried to do in the last couple of years with the launch of our fellowship is, one, to pay the fellows a $2,000 a month stipend as they travel along with us, and to help them build out their business model and provide like intentional space for them to really grow and build their work. But I think that often we're not, it's training after training without the type of capital that allows organizations really to thrive. And then we say, see, you need more capacity.
I love that point. I think the term capacity building can often be such a misnomer, because what is the number one lever that we have to build capacity? It's funding, right? Because funding unlocks capacity, unlocks, like you said, the ability to hire, the ability to train, the ability to have that space. All of that is capacity. There's no point in learning if you don't have space or time to learn. There's no point in training if you don't have space and time to absorb the training or put it into practice. And what I see on the front lines from my point of view is that a lot of organizations, yes, they're lacking capacity, but that is just a deeper symptom of a deeper problem of lacking funding and the resources that they actually need to be able to unlock that capacity. I want to double down a little bit around what the current state of what term could we even use to describe this? You work with Black-led organizations. I've heard it described as liberation. I've heard it described as DEI. Obviously, there's a whole spectrum of this, but circa 2020 through 2022, there was an upsurgence because of the cultural tide shifting and a recognition. And now there's been some political backlash that I think is, comes from many different points of view, either because of ignorance or misinformation or bad faith actors. But philanthropy seems to be, and corporate philanthropy especially, seems to be very almost relieved to be done with that in a lot of different ways, to get back to business as usual, which is obviously a travesty. How has that been for you, and how has that been for the organizations and the community that you serve?
Yeah, it's been tough. I think particularly for organizations that have relied on federal grant making and funding over the years to have that snatched overnight is a major impact for those organizations. For us in particular, that's just haven't been our model. Our model has been, how do you, one, build a revenue base as you do this work? And how do we develop sort of individual relationships with donors to sustain this work? Like, I am clear when you are trying to do liberatory work, that these attacks will come. And so I'm always sort of planning for these moments, whether it is a Trump moment or this DEI moment. I think history again shows us that these sort of, when you're beginning to make a certain level of progress, that there will be a sort of snapback. And so it's to be able to prepare in such a way that says, how do we build sustainable organizations in the midst of this work? And also, I think it's telling about like, who are our real partners?
Yeah.
Who really are our friends and allies in this moment. And so for me, it is refreshing to see those who are doubling down and understand that they're just as committed as they were before. And then to also see those who are fly by night, and when the moment is hot and it is whatever issue it is, whether it be the Black community, the LGBT community, environment, whatever it is, how they sort of move at the wind of a thing, and those who are, again, committed because of the values and see each other as human and what we want to do to make a difference in this world.
Hey friends, real quick before we continue today's episode. I'm Eric Ressler, founder and creative director at Cosmic. Cosmic is a creative agency purpose-built for nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. For the last 15 years, we've helped leaders like you nail your impact story and sharpen your strategy. But we're not here to just leave you with a fancy slide deck and a pat on the back. We roll up our sleeves and help you bring our ideas to life through campaigns, creative, and digital experiences. Our work together helps you earn trust, connect deeply with your supporters, and grow your fundraising and your impact. If you value the thinking we share here and want it applied to your biggest challenges, let's talk at designbycosmic.com. All right, back to today's conversation. I want to touch on your model and this philosophy of building in earned revenue, which is not always possible for all types of organizations. But there's common advice out there that just like a portfolio of investments, that you should have a diversified portfolio of funders. And then there's also some counterpoints out there that have shown with some research that seems solid to me, published in SSIR, which I'll link to in the show notes of this episode, that a lot of organizations who have been able to scale largely get really good at one particular, maybe two particular fundraising methodologies. It doesn't seem like trusting the federal government to fund this social work is a good bet to place right now, especially if you're doing anything progressive, especially if you're doing anything that could be considered DEI focused work. And we're seeing a lot of organizations then shift to individual major donors who are value aligned. How are you thinking about that as a funder, but also an organization that does have to fundraise to build out the resources to generate those funds and to distribute them to organizations in your community?
Sure, definitely doubling down on individual donors and relationships. One of the things I thought about a couple of years ago was the idea, will we scale wide or scale deep? And we landed on the decision of scaling deep and really being intentional about building the relationships here locally. And it's worked well. We're off of our collective give, our annual day of giving, a day to support Black-led social change organizations in Baltimore. Launched in 2019, raised about $5,000 in 24 hours, and just raised $1.2 million this summer in 24 hours, our third year, over $1 million. So I believe in sort of crowdfunding. I believe in individual donors, really cultivating those relationships so that we aren't. I often walk into philanthropy, say partnership, not paternalism. And this is from the beginning of like, how do we partner? How do you see us as a value partner and want to invest with us for the long haul? And, some say we don't, and we keep it moving. And then there's those who have stuck around. So I believe that it is finding those sort of trusted partners who understand the value of the work, that you don't have to keep pitching and keep selling what you're doing. They see you and they see the impact in community, but they're also looking at, I think about 67% of philanthropy is individual donors. So looking at that large pool of individual donors that are using their personal wealth to give back to community. We're also getting on the beginning of launching a new campaign called the Power One, something I did years ago, where it's a dollar-based campaign. And it really is saying that everyone has an entry point into philanthropy, into giving their time, talent, and treasure. And so for me, it's really doubling down on individual donors and doing that work, as well as we'll be launching a new platform later this fall, which is a revenue-based platform. So the donor fees that everybody else is charging us right now, we'll kind of use some of that, 3%, but it's regenerative in the sense that those funds help us grant make and continue to do the work back in community.
You talk about individual donors, and I think this is the common direction we're seeing a lot of orgs moving towards, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and that's been a recommendation of ours for a lot of our clients. You've gone from, you said, a $5,000 day to an over $1 million day in a short amount of time through individual donors. What are some of the things that you've learned about that modality of fundraising that's important? You say it's relationship based. You hear that a lot. What does it actually look like in practice? Like, walk me through how you think about that, how you show up, how you plan for that when you're looking at securing, big investments from individual donors.
Yeah, we started a process, a liberatory process, where we go through like our virtues, our values, sort of how, sort of the history of philanthropy and how even some receive their wealth through extraction. Yeah. And what does it really look like to be in relationship and see each other as humans? And one of the processes I participated in 2018 was Old Money, New Systems. And it was a great time of individuals of high net worth, folks in nonprofit space, activists coming together to reimagine what philanthropy could look like. And we went through a similar process of healing, of looking at the historical implications of philanthropy, and then building something new, which was a fun together. And it was individuals of high net worth in there who say, you know what, this is the first time I've been in a space where I felt like I didn't have a dollar sign on my head. And so one of the things I realized was that we all have needs, right? And sometimes there's this power imbalance in philanthropy. And what does it mean to sort of remove that power balance and begin to have just human conversations? And so in our first fund, everyone could ask. So individuals of high net worth cannot ask for money, but they might say, oh, Jamie, can I have an hour of your time? I want to learn more about this. Or if you're in Baltimore, you need an extra room, I have a room you could stay in. So it's ways in which we create an exchange so that it's not always that power balance or seen as this sort of one-way exchange of giving. So it's worked well. And over the years, it's been tears. It's been people walking away and coming back. But I can say for the most part, folks have stayed the journey to do the tough work. And so I think, again, relationships and doubling down on being honest and truthful about these moments that we find ourselves in, willing to wrestle with certain ideas, but ultimately thinking about what it means to be human and give back to community.
This year has been especially challenging for a lot of organizations who are justice oriented in their work, who are trying to create social change, who feel like there's been some major setbacks, especially here in America. But I'm curious to hear, especially as you're working in community, in a local, regional focus to some degree, not that your impact stays local, but your focus is there clearly. What are you seeing right now that is inspiring? Like, what paths are you seeing that are kind of defying this moment despite all of the challenges and the friction and the setbacks that are happening?
Yeah, I think that this theme of imagination is not just ours. I think it is in the air. And the beauty of that is even in these moments, people sort of reclaiming their joy, reclaiming time, reclaiming space, deciding how they're going to live in this moment. And so I see less of, again, what I would call years ago, reactivism. I think it's there. And I think we have to react and we have to respond to these moments. But I see people being a lot more intentional about their time, their space, their joy, and creating the world that they want. And so I'm excited about, what I see emerging. I see our residents who are creating new songs and using animation to tell stories. Like, I'm excited about what people are working on and that their joy and their purpose is not being robbed by this moment.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's also really hard for a lot of people too, right? And it's not something that's going to come naturally. It's a muscle, right? That you have to have the space for, but you have to put the energy into it as well.
Yeah, I'm part of this design community, and it's all around sacred memory and imagining. And these are very heady people. And so it took a moment. Like, one of the things that we did was watercoloring. And we do a lot of things to say, like, how do you get out of head and more into heart?
Yeah.
Because it is hard, even when you have space, to get back into that imaginative space. And so we've been really trying to, like, okay, what does it mean to really slow down with folks who are, very heady, and often, like, that's where their superpower is, to go back and to be embodied.
Yeah, I mean, this hits really home for me. I'm definitely one of those people that tends to live in my head and my brain's going 24/7, especially as I'm trying to solve problems. And it's a superpower, but it's a huge deficit if it's not controlled. And so I've found for sure I need to get those moments of embodiment, whatever term you want to use. For me, that's music. For me, that's exercise. If I know that if I don't do enough of those things consistently enough, even if I don't feel like I have the energy for it, ultimately it's just not helpful, right? I mean, for a long time at Cosmic, we've had a 4-day work week where we have Fridays off. This year's been a little different for us, just to be transparent, because we've had to buckle up and put the head to the grindstone a little bit more than we usually do, largely just in service to our clients who need extra support right now, who are asking it of us, and get a little bit more scrappy and entrepreneurial than we've been. And that's been hard in some ways, but in other ways it's been refreshing in the sense that it's kind of taking me back to the early days of starting the organization and that entrepreneurial, experimental, learning based mindset that, we figured a lot out over the last 15 years here doing this work. But one of our core values is Kaizen, which is continuous learning, continuous improvement. This year's really tested me personally, that, and my team on that. But I think it's also I'm picking up on the vibe that you're describing, which is this sense of like intentionality. I think everyone's being forced in this cultural moment to figure out, how do I show up? How do I show up best? What do I focus on? What do I let go of? And I do think that I've been trying to get more of this out, and I've been hearing this from interviews on this show. Everyone's got to find that thing that re-energizes them. And there's been a lot of talk about like whatever, self-care, right? And I think like self-care is like one version of that, but it's just like, what's your humanity? And like, what is it that makes you feel most alive and most human? And making sure, easier said than done, but like whenever possible, like carving out space for that. And I challenge everyone listening who says they don't have space for that to look at their screen time report every week and figure out, how much of that time could I be giving up for other things instead? Very guilty of this myself. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. It's just a reflection. And I'm curious to hear, like, what is that for you, man? Like, what keeps you lit up? What keeps you energized? Obviously, the work that you're doing is important. It's meaningful. It's substantial. But even outside of that, like, just for you personally, like, what are those things for you?
The other Sarah, our facilitator at retreat last week said the times are urgent. We must slow down.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, so it's beautiful, particularly like in the way in which I can go. Like I think we've carved out like focus weeks and other things that we implement in this work calls me as well. And so I have to do better in my own pacing at moments. Is, I can stay on the grind because I really love this work, but I try to spend as much time by the water as I can. To your point earlier, I think that I realized some of my greatest ideas and inspiration comes through the slow down. And I try to catch myself aware, I realize sometimes I have been busy without being productive, that I could have shut down 2 hours ago. I was just scrolling the last 2 hours. And why now I'm even at my office as opposed to home. And that was a piece too, where, I'm at home and it's 7, it's 8, and the kids are like, are we eating tonight? My son, I just came back from Brazil 2 weeks ago, and I'm sitting there with my son on the bed. And he said, Dad, he's 14, I'm homeschooling him. He said, you're so close, but so far. Man.
That hurts, man. That's hard to hear.
Yeah, that's just like, you think you're kind of doing something. I'm homeschooling. Right. I'm physically present, but I wasn't emotionally present. And so it's that piece too of saying like, okay, I heard you loud and clear. And so what does it mean to like create those boundaries, to slow down, for family that sees you doing work in the world? And it's hard for me to get your attention in this moment. So I can't tell you that I have the balance in that. This work calls me, I love it, but I am definitely trying to be more intentional of between home and work and what it means to come into the office to when I come home, we're not going back into work. I could do this work night in and night out. I think it gives me great joy to see, what we hear often from the organizations is thanks for seeing me. So even more than the grant, it's sort of acknowledgement of their humanity, that they've been here, they've been in community, they've been working tirelessly to serve. And thanks for seeing me is such a great currency. And I just have to make sure, I think I'm doing a decent job, but I have to make sure, like if my children aren't saying that, then something's out of whack. And so for my son saying that to me, it was definitely a piece of saying, okay, I heard you, and I got to make sure I'm being more intentional at home as well.
Yeah. And I mean, kids have a way of just really cutting deep in those kind of ways, right? And just being so clear-eyed about it. And yeah, I think it is hard to just shut down sometimes, right? Especially when you're doing important work, especially when you're doing the kind of work that, it's different to do this kind of work than, let's say, working in a cabinet shop or something, right? Where you come home, like, you might be thinking about cabinets still at some level. And again, I'm not here to diminish cabinet makers. In some ways, I'm kind of jealous of that kind of setup. But the kind of work that you do, and I think it's similar for me, I could spin on this 24/7, and I love it, and I believe in it, and I do think there's some truth in that. And at the same time, like showing up more for your friends, for your family, like knowing how to turn it off, because your brain's still going to do it, right? Even if you turn it off, even if you are emotionally present in the background, I believe your brain's still going at some level, working on solving those problems, even if they're subconscious. So I completely relate to that. And I've been trying to work on that myself, oftentimes failing at doing so. Of just like when I come in after a day of work where I have worked hard, or maybe in a day that wasn't very productive, right? Where it's like, oh, I didn't get the things done that I needed to get done or that I'd hoped to get done for whatever reason. It can be especially hard to shut off on those days, I find. But I've also found that when I do, I'm more, even productive is the wrong word to use. I'm more effective overall, right? I'm more able to show up at my best when I do show up at work. And yeah, I mean, it's a constant tuning, in my opinion, right? It's not something you fix and you're done with. It's like you have to be constantly intentional about it. So, Jamye, before we wrap up, I mean, this has been amazing. Thank you again for your time today. How can people get in touch with you? How can they follow you? Is there anything that you want to promote and, let our listeners know about that you're excited about right now?
Sure. We're collectively at CLLCTIVLY on all social media. That is the website. I'm excited about our new platform. I think that our current way of being, we can be as an organization the bottleneck. The new platform will allow change makers and donors and community members all to be on the same platform and to build community as well. So very excited. That should launch early October. The last few years, we've hosted the 28 Days of Black Futures. That's every February for Black History Month. The year before last, we did the Black Future Cypher, where it's a new artist dropping every day. We'll do that again for this February. So it was amazing. Few awards back here from that campaign. So it was an amazing digital media campaign. So look out for that as well. Also, just recently came back from South Africa, where we're looking at building a global impact house. So believing in place, but what does it look like to partner with other folks around the world? So excited about what the future of partnering around the world and doing this work looks like.
Awesome. Love it, Jamye. I feel like we could do an episode on each of those things, but for today, we'll wrap it up, and thank you again for your time. This is great.
Thanks so much. It was beautiful. Appreciate you, Eric.
If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. It really helps. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do for your cause and for being part of the movement to move humanity and the planet forward.